This episode is a part of the T-Talk series, where we discuss and destigmatize interdisciplinary neuroscience and psychology topics with experts in the field, mental health professionals, and all-around cool people. Listen while sipping on tea or coffee. There is no judgment here. Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in today. I'm Amanda, your co-host for this episode.
And I'm Chandni, your other co-host.
And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Horvath, who is an expert in the field of educational neuroscience, and we'll be talking about stress. I hope you all have your tea. I have my tea and are ready to spill it with us. Let's get right into it. Dr. Horvath, could you please tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Jared Horvath. So you can just call me Dr. Jared or Jared. It doesn't faze me at all. And I am, so I was a teacher originally, but now I'm a cognitive neuroscientist who focuses on learning. So memory, attention, anything that students or teachers can use to kind of help boost impact in the classroom. That's kind of where I sit.
So why did you decide to become a cognitive neuroscience and professor?
Back when I was teaching, I thought that was when the brain stuff started to become really kind of popular. So it was the decade of the brain back in the US and everyone was talking, it's the new frontier. So I kind of had this thought that if I can go figure out the brain, then I can bring that back and that'll make me a better teacher. Like if I know how people learn, cool, how could that hurt? So really it was only supposed to be about a year or two I was going to be back at university, but that's now ended up being 15 years where I've gone kind of deep clinical for a while, deep research for a while. I will at some point become a teacher again once all this research figuring out the brain stuff fades away. But I've been able to use kind of everything I'm learning to help other teachers and students along the way. I know you guys are of the age where school is, you're either loving it or you're hating it. And it's starting to suck for you. But I don't know, I was always that kid who just loved it. And I've always enjoyed the idea that there's an institution where you go to learn new stuff. For all the people who talk about like 21st century skills, like, oh, what are you going to need in a job ready future? And they're talking about creativity and critical thinking and all this stuff. Nonsense. There's only one skill you need that any human being has ever needed, that you will ever possibly need to succeed in a changing world. And it's the ability to learn. The people who know how to approach new situations and really quickly embody and use that information, those are the people who define what creativity means. They define what critical thinking is. So learning at the end of the day, if you can master that, congratulations, that's the one skill that's going to make you untouchable.
Yeah, that's awesome. Also expanding like our definition of learning too, because a lot of people think learning is just memorization.
So if you consider learning as a trajectory, it goes from, we tend to say it goes from surface through like 3 levels of deep learning. And then you've got this issue of transfer. How do I move my learning? So it's not a moment. It's a massive process. But you're right. I think historically people focus only on that surface. That's step 1, which is get the information in. So there's been a lot of schools and a lot of kids who are like, Google exists, so I don't need to know anything. I can just look it up. And watch when those kids flounder fast. The ability to access knowledge we've learned is very different than having that knowledge embodied within you. In order to use any of your techniques or skills or do anything with it, you have to have that knowledge as part of your schema. It has to be in you. It can't just be out there. So for as much as we hate the memorization stage, that is wildly necessary, but that's not where learning stops. That's really just at the end of that, that's where learning really kicks in. It's just some of us took it a little too seriously. We swung that pendulum too hard, cut out all memorization, and now kids are suffering from that, unfortunately.
So how do you define stress?
Stress. So stress is a tricky little beast. To understand stress, you have to differentiate between emotions and feelings. So a lot of the times when we talk about emotions and feelings, we just glom them together into one thing. They're not. They're very different. Emotions are physical sensations within your body. So if you have a racing heart, if you have clammy skin, if you have, shortness of breath, those are emotions. They're physical manifestations. A feeling is then your mental interpretation of those sensations. So let's say you get a racing heart. There's a million things in the world that can cause a racing heart. I don't know. Are you exercising? Are you scared of something? Did you just fall in love with somebody? So what happens is the emotion, your body starts doing something, and then your mind kicks in and it has to interpret it. And it goes, okay, racing heart. And it looks around the world and it says, a spider Racing heart plus spider must be fear. And boom, then you get the feeling of fear. So that's the mental interpretation. A lot of people think stress is an emotion. It's a physical thing. It's not. It's a feeling. Stress is a mental interpretation of a scenario, of a context, of an issue. So when we say that stress happens in your mind, we're not being flippant or metaphorical. It is a choice. So most of your emotions you can't choose. Like if a spider jumps on your chest, your body is going to respond however it's going to respond. You can't pick the emotion, but you do get to pick the feeling. So the way I kind of like to clarify that is, imagine if we all jumped out of an airplane. We would all get the same emotional rush as soon as we jumped out of that airplane. Some of you are going to feel those tingles in that racing heart, and you're going to select fun, enjoyment. And that's then going to feed back and start changing the chemicals in your body to give you more excitement, more joy. Rewind the clock. I jump out of a plane. I'll get the same chemical rush you do. I'll get the same emotion, but I'm going to interpret that as terror. I have no interest in doing this. And so that's going to feed back and start to change how my body reacts. So at the end of the day, we had the same emotion, but because we chose two different feelings, that then fed back and changed how our body responded to that situation. So stress, in a nutshell, is a mental choice, an interpretation of a context that then drives later response within your body. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So our perception of the situation drives how we define stress.
Yeah, it's so once you've selected stress and that starts to feed back into your body, different people will start to feel it slightly different. So some people will get a racing heart, some people get a clammed up face, like their face gets scrunchy. Some people feel a tightness maybe in the back of their head. So the physical sensations that come after stress are going to be different. But you're right, the initial selection of stress is highly dependent on who you are. You're the one who gets to pick whether or not a situation is stressful, relaxing, cool. That's us. That's the power of feelings over emotions.
Mm-hmm. Do you think over time you could build your stress tolerance?
Absolutely. So I think we do it all the time. You guys, probably the first time you ever had to sit an exam, I'm guessing you interpreted it pretty frighteningly and probably picked stress. But now as you're getting older, as you're getting later in school, you're probably seeing, okay, I've got a 3-hour exam coming up. It still sucks, but you can handle it now. You've got that kind of resilience where you're like, I've been through this a dozen times. Your skin is thick. And now, believe it or not, most of you won't select stress anymore. You'll just select hard work or effort or something else that's not that same stressful response. So yeah, the more you get used to any stress, believe it or not, the less you get it because you just start to think differently about that situation. It's no longer considered stressful for you. A good way to think about it is with fears is if you're afraid of spiders, so you get stressed when you're around spiders, the only cure we have for fears like that is what's called exposure therapy, is we'll get you to start thinking of a spider while changing your interpretation. Then we'll get you to imagine touching a spider. Then we'll get you to play with a toy spider. And all this while, all we're going to do is we're going to trigger that stress response. We're going to say, can you do something different? Can you think about this differently? And after a couple 6 weeks of work on that, eventually you're holding a spider on your face and you're not stressed out anymore because you've just changed your interpretation of what a spider should be.
Do you think there comes a point where too much stress is bad? You shouldn't be pushing that tolerance?
Yeah, absolutely. So stress, you kind of have two flavors of stress that you have to look at in this case. If we just talk about pure duration of stress, so you've got what we call acute stresses, and then you've got chronic stress. So acute stress are moments, right? I have to sit a test. Ooh, this sucks. Ooh, I have to give a talk in front of people. Ooh, stress. Chronic stress is when a situation just extends for 3, 4, 5, 6 days. So a lot of people, like with Corona, being trapped at home, unable to go to work, that's like 6 weeks worth of stress that some people might be feeling. When the duration gets too long, the mechanism switches and all of a sudden stress becomes dangerous. So during a short-term stress, your body responds by essentially upregulating your memory and learning. Your body says, if something is stressful and it's making you choose stress, it's probably really important. So I want you to remember as much of it as you can. So if you're ever in the situation again in the future, you can think back and you can handle it. So short-term stress, we get really deep active memories. Like I'll tell you what, man, watching that, the Beirut explosion just happened yesterday. Watching that video, the first time I saw it, I'll never forget that now. I have an imprinted memory of that. It was so shockingly stressful to watch that happen that I'm like, boom, my body's like, dang, you must remember that. Here's your memory. Now, once stress gets to about 3, 4, 5 days in a row, your brain stops thinking, ooh, this is important. Remember this. Your brain starts thinking, ooh, you're stuck, aren't you? You're helpless. You can't stop this. In which case, you don't want a deep memory. If you're stuck having a deep abiding memory is horrible because that's just going to cause trauma in the future. So what happens is your learning machinery essentially downregulates. It shuts down. You stop learning things. You stop making memories until the stress stops. The brain essentially hibernates until you're out of that stress situation, and then it'll kick back on. Pushing your stress too far, you're going to reach a point where eventually the brain switches and all memory and learning just go right out the window. So you've got to kind of play it on this day by day basis, essentially.
That's like the whole thing with learned helplessness, with the experience with the dogs. They just stop trying after a while.
Bingo. It's because the stress of trying and failing and not being certain what's going to happen, the brain just goes, don't worry about it. Just survive. I'll make sure your heart's beating. I'll make sure you're still breathing. You survive. And when we get out of here, I'll turn you back on.
Mm-hmm. And also, like, memories of prolonged stressful events, I feel like you suppress after the fact. A lot of domestic violence victims that come out of abusive relationships, they just totally like suppress that whole period of their lives to cope.
Yeah.
It's like a coping mechanism.
So take the idea of suppression, which is a mental choice. So I'm going to not think about this, and internalize that into a biological mechanism. It's essentially the same thing. It's like your brain saying, ooh, a coping mechanism, I don't want to remember any of this stuff. So what you find is a lot of people who come out of abusive relationships, they tend to have very stark, vivid moments, memories for the first several instances of abuse, and then it becomes gray. And we used to think that, yep, they were purposely suppressing it, but now we're starting to think that no, as a survival mechanism, the brain itself was suppressing it. It was never laying down those memories because there was nothing left for that person to learn. Once you learned it after the first 3 times, you don't need to learn it anymore.
That makes sense. Like, obviously, students who are like in exam season and they have like 2 weeks of exams coming up, then obviously the stress is really bad for them because they can't remember what they spent so much time studying if they're stressful during that time.
So the good news is if the stress comes with the performance, then it should be okay. But if you feel the stress while you're doing the actual studying, that's where you're going to see those issues. So if it's while you're prepping for 2 weeks of exams, you're feeling the stress, you're getting the tension, then a lot of that study time might just start to fade on you. And when you get to the test, you'll be like, why can't I remember this? I know I read that chapter. It just was never laid down. If you can stop or abate the stress response during study, so you can at least get the memories in, that's going to be strong. The joke is only you know when you've crossed that threshold of duration because it's different for everybody. Some people could do 2 weeks of tests fine because they only feel the stress while taking the test. But in between each test, they're back to normal, so it's not bad. Other people will, and these people they're highly anxious. They have ruminative minds. They'll do the entire 2 weeks of not sleeping, just thinking about the test. And those are the ones where you need to be in touch and go, uh-oh, I've crossed the threshold. This isn't working anymore. Time to reset and figure out a way to cut this response out.
Oh, man. I feel like I crossed my threshold today because I completely crammed for my philosophy exam tomorrow.
How long were you studying?
I was studying, I study in blocks. So like 2 hours and then break 2 hours.
Jeez.
And I continue like that.
I
know. What the heck are you going to learn? 4 hours of study in philosophy. You're going to know more than anyone else. That's ridiculous.
No, I mean no, because I procrastinate into the very last minute. So I learned unit 2 all today.
Here's the joke. Procrastination and cramming doesn't work. Do you still pass your tests?
I do, but I wish I had a better schedule.
The trick is if you cram before an exam, you're probably going to pass the exam. But as you notice, about a week later, you'll forget about 80% of everything you just studied. Cram if that's your last ditch effort. Otherwise, if you have a chance to do just a little bit every night, then not only will you pass the exam, but you'll maintain those memories for a year. So if you take that same test in a year, you'll still do fine on it. But the cramming means you'll pass today, but you'll probably forget it all tomorrow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. Hey, there ain't no judgment. That's how I got through school. It just is what it is.
I will work on that.
It becomes, you'll notice you'll kick out of it. It might not even be in uni. It'll be when you start to chase your real passion. You'll just naturally kick out of that mode because cramming is good for exams. But once you're doing what you really want to do, exams don't really matter to you anymore. And all of a sudden you start doing about an hour to 2 hours a day naturally. And not because you're studying for anything, but because that's just what you want to know and understand. And so all of a sudden the cramming just disappears largely because you found what you want to do with your life. You're happy with what you're doing. play it while you play it and just know it'll go away at some point.
Thank you for that motivation.
So do you think you're going to go the route of neuroscience?
Yes, I'm majoring in it actually, and I'm going to see how it goes. I'm trying to go the more behavioral route with the wet lab.
Yeah, you'll enjoy the behavioral stuff. I that's my bag. I couldn't, the brain slices and the microscopes. I get it. I just never loved it.
You had to slice a brain?
Oh yeah. Oh, you will too. You can't escape it if you're going down the neuroscience route at some point. So when you dissect a brain, as you know, it's set with chemicals so that you can actually it's formed. It doesn't just decompose. So most of the brains you dissect are going to be kind of rubbery, kind of gummy. But if you ever get to touch a living brain, so go into a surgery when they're doing open head, ooh, it is such a different feeling. It's frightening how soft it is. Like it feels like pudding more than anything else. Like if you sneezed, the whole thing would just go. So it's, I know it's very weird, but if you ever get a chance to go into one of those surgeries, go do it and then touch a living brain and see what it's like.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
But stick with it. You can do it. Or if you know somebody who's a neurosurgeon, just have them sneak you in and go and just touch the brain and then run out real fast.
Okay. A little bit of a digression there.
Back on track.
Back on to debunking some myths about stress. Our first myth is that having no stress is ideal and that stress is bad for you.
So go back to our issue of duration of stress, right? Short-term stress actually boosts your learning because the brain goes, uh-oh, something important's happening. Long-term stress can kill your memory because your brain goes, uh-oh, you're stuck. Don't worry about all this. Turns out the other way works as well. When you have no stress, your brain goes, sweet, there is nothing important going on. And what does it do? It just hibernates. So people who say I want, pure stress-free, there's no pressure, there's no nothing. That's not enough to get the juices flowing, to get the cognitive machinery working. That moderate amount of stress is actually essential to learning. So this is where we start to say challenge. So what's a good stress? That's where challenge and pushing yourself past the limits and embracing failure, that's the good kind of stress that keeps you moving forward. You keep doing the things that you're already good at without ever pushing past that, no stress. Watch when your brain just starts to deteriorate because like everything else, entropy, it'll just start to wither away. It'll say, sweet, you don't need me. And then all of a sudden you start losing your abilities. So moderate stress is not good. I would say it's essential.
So how can students classify between moderate and like extreme stress? Because I know a lot of people might think that, oh yeah, I'm doing moderate stress, this is what's needed, but then they're actually like move past that, but they don't realize it. So how can you classify where you are?
A good rule of thumb is to start to, and you'll have to do this for a couple of weeks, but you have to recognize your, what we call overwhelm. So once a stressor becomes too extreme and you've pushed past your limit, everyone gets a physical sensation that is their overwhelm moment. Essentially, that's the moment when the brain flips and you lose it. The problem is like, I wish we all had the same feeling in the same moment, but we don't. So you have to recognize what yours is. So you have to just spend about 6 weeks doing nothing but being meta aware and just watch yourself and pay attention. And anytime you feel like you've kicked past there, pay close attention and just write that down. Say, ooh, what just happened? And once you get really good at recognizing your overwhelm moment, then you have to play that yourself and start to go, okay, I'm going to challenge myself. Oh, I've pushed too hard. I'm done. Once you explicitly focus on it, you can get really good at seeing it. Even when I think back growing up, like playing Sega Genesis, right? We used to play Sonic the Hedgehog. I would try and beat a level under a certain time. And then there would just be this moment where like I'd be getting closer and closer and closer. And then it would just bomb. I'd have one just horrible run. I chucked the controller at the screen. This is back before when screens are made of glass, so they would just dink off and it was fine. I wouldn't like shatter it. But that was in hindsight, that was my overwhelm moment. I now recognize that in myself as an adult when I hit that moment where everything just collapses. And whenever I see it now as an adult, I'm like, I'm out. And wherever I'm at, I could be in the middle of a talk. I don't care. I say I'm out and I'll just spend the next 5 or 10 minutes calming down, doing my own stuff. But yeah, I can't tell you what it's going to feel like for you. So you've got to just recognize it in yourself. What is it going to be for you? Me, I get super angry. My wife, she gets super reactive. You've just got to learn what your pattern is. And boom, when you've hit it, then you've got to just stop and reset.
Yeah. That or you're hangry.
Hey, oh, my wife gets the hanger too. It's a very similar sensation. It's a sensation like you're out of control. You can no longer control your thinking. And so hangry is a very similar sensation. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of debunked the myth that the best way to deal with stress is to exercise, breathe, and relax.
What's interesting with stress is because it's a mental thing, the best way to tackle it is mentally. So you choose the mental feeling of stress. That then feeds back and starts to change your body. So you've got two ways to tackle it. You can tackle it through your body, and that's a really good short-term answer. So if you assume the primary stress chemical, when you pick the feeling of stress, cortisol is the main chemical that starts shooting through your body and makes you feel all tingly and stuff. A lot of exercise and deep breathing and physical work can burn off that cortisol. So if you can go really quickly lift weights or do a squat for like 10 minutes and just burn through all the cortisol in your body, it'll calm your body down and you'll be feeling normal. The problem is after you do that, there's every chance that you could go right back into the situation, re-pick the emotion or the feeling of stress, and then get those chemicals right back. So the physical attack is really good in the short term, but if you want long-term success over stress, you've got to change. It's a mental game. You've got to attack it mentally. How are you interpreting these situations? And when it comes to kind of that, the mental side, our key tool, we'll say, is what's called reframing, where you have to change the way you interpret the world. Now, to reframe, there are kind of two versions of reframing that are popular. The first is called find the good in the bad. And so that's where you reframe, where you say, okay, this sucks, I'm stressed out, but wait, what am I getting beneficial from this moment? So everything in the world is polar. Every positive has a negative, every up has a down. It can't exist without its polar opposite. Stress is no different. So if you're stressed, like I'm in the car, stuck in traffic, stressed out of my mind, I have to find the good and the bad. Okay, I'm not moving, but what am I getting? I can listen to the radio. I haven't listened to my CDs in a long time. I can call my wife. I get to relax here in the car. Every time something bad's happening, you're getting something good from it. So if you can find that, that can help you reframe and change the stress choice. The other option, if you can't find the good and the bad, is to do what we call perspective. So let's say you're stuck in traffic and you're like, nothing good is happening here. You've got to completely take yourself out of your position, put yourself in somebody else's shoes, and rewrite the entire thing. So you're stuck in traffic, you're not moving, it sucks, there's nothing good. Perspective. What if this traffic jam is being caused by a wreck up ahead and some dude is about to die and they need to get him to a hospital now? Am I willing to stay here in my car for 10 more minutes so this guy can survive? Absolutely I am. Now I've changed my perspective, now I can stop choosing stress. So you've got kind of find the good and the bad or change your perspective are our two mental ways to start tackling things like that. And that's the strongest way to hit stress because they're long term. You do that right, it doesn't just fix your stress in the moment, it fixes it for a long time past that.
Yeah, I like how you said that the physical ways to cope with stress are more short term, because a lot of people like turn to, I don't know, working out. Those are like the healthy coping ways, but then other people turn to like alcohol or drugs to suppress that stress.
Oh yeah.
And they just need to know like that's not long term at all.
Hey, if you're going to drink, the stress might go away when you're drunk. It probably won't, but it could. But as soon as you're sober again, don't be surprised when it comes right back up. It didn't fix the underlying issue. It just it was a Band-Aid, and now the Band-Aid's done. So you guys are right at the age where that's going to be a thing. When you go to university, people drink, people do drugs. It's okay. That's how you learn how to handle the system. As you get older, you just stop doing it because you have other things to do. But it's funny that whenever I get super stressed at work, I think back to, man, I could really use a drink. And it's funny because I don't drink all that much anymore, but I certainly did in college. And now I that's just a remnant from that. I built this pattern where stress equals have a drink. And I did it so much when I was a kid. And even now as an adult, anytime I really feel stressed, my first reaction is, oh, go have that drink. And I have to step back and be like, well, is that really what's going on here? Is that going to help? Or is that just you being a kid again?
Is this a result of classical conditioning?
Boom. The easier way to even say it, it's just a habit at that point. Yep. I've built a distinct cord between those two things so often in my life that now they just seem interchangeable. And it's my fault. I did it to myself.
And it's also like the shortcut, you know, like who wants to take so long to like switch their perspective, or like it takes a lot of energy, you know, especially when you're in a really crappy situation.
My wife is she's a clinical psychologist, and that's it. She says the hardest thing to deal with new patients is they want the quick fix. They don't recognize that it takes work and effort. If you want to change your thinking, you got to put some time. If you want to get stronger, you got to work out. If you want to lose weight, you got to go on a diet. If you want to change your thinking, you got to put in the effort.
Yeah. And stress looks different for everyone. So like the solution to your coping with your stress is different too.
Yeah, it's going to have different triggers. Like we could all be afraid of the same thing. Like we all have stress from tests, but the underlying cause for it could be wildly different. So it looks like the same stress on the surface, but underneath we have our own reasons, we have our own patterns, and that's what we got to deal with individually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the next myth is that everyone experiences stress the same way, and specifically, is the degree to which we experience stress different for like different genders?
Everyone does experience stress subjectively in the same way. I mean, in different ways. So it will feel different to you than it does to me. Objectively, the chemicals are going to be very similar though. So when you're saying you're stressed and I'm saying I'm stressed, if I can measure the chemicals in your body, I can see if we're both stressed. It has kind of a signature to it. And that's largely the cortisol and these ARC proteins and other things. When it comes to different groups, you can assume different groups are going to feel stress differently. There are going to be some people more prone to stress. Highly anxious people are largely more prone to stress. Sick people are largely more prone to stress. Is there a gender difference? Yes and no. So here's the joke with this. During adolescence, there appears to be a strong gender difference where one gender reports feeling chronic stress way more, like not even close, than the other. Which one do you think it is? Do you think women or men during adolescence have more stress?
Women?
Yep, absolutely. Females, it's not even in the ball game. And we don't know 100% why, but we have kind of two theories on it. Theory one, women just have a lot more stuff to deal with during adolescence. When you guys hit puberty, it's a very different process than when men hit puberty. Sex is a massive issue for women when it doesn't seem to be as big an issue for men. Pressure of families, everything, there's just a lot more pressure seems to be heaped on women during that stage. In addition, though, we think there's a secondary mechanism, which is essentially mirroring. So you guys probably know this, is human beings, we imitate each other covertly. Like when I'm talking to you, I don't pretend I'm you, but inside my head, I'm kind of speaking along with you. I'm trying to put myself in your shoes. This is where we get empathy and sympathy. We can mirror one another. When somebody feels stress, they want that to be mirrored back to them. They want to essentially share that with somebody, and that helps alleviate some of the pressure. Now, problem, during adolescence, women tend to have a best friend. Females tend to dichotomize, which means if you have one woman with stress, they have somebody who's willing to mirror that back to them. But now you've got two people with stress. So it seems to be somewhat contagious amongst females. If you've got a best friend who just broke up with her boyfriend, you want to share that with them. So it's not a bad thing. It's just cool. Guys, on the other hand, we don't tend to, during adolescence, have best friends. We have a whole tribe, like a group, which means if a dude is feeling stressed, they come into their tribe, their 10 other friends, and like, guys, I am stressed. None of them are going to mirror it back. Like they'll divvy it up. I'll take 10%, you take 10%, I'll take 10%. At the end of the day, none of them actually take it all on. And they're like, dude, just get over it. Rub some dirt in it. You're fine. Move on. So we think one of the differences between the reason why women feel so much more stress during adolescence is that they pass it to each other willingly, where guys typically don't have anywhere to send it. So if you have one stress guy, you have one stress guy. If you have one stress woman, you have two stress women. But where this comes back, and this is why we think that even though there's a discrepancy between men and women during adolescence reporting stress, it might be less than we think it is. Because if you look at the statistics for acting on stress, let's just take, and we're going to get serious here, take suicide. Adolescent teenage women talk about suicide and threaten it 80% more than men do during adolescence. So it's out in the open. It's a thing for them. Men during adolescence are 80% more likely to commit suicide. So here's where we see that issue. When a woman feels stressed and has someone to mirror it with, it seems like they have an outlet. And here they can talk about the stress, the suicidal thoughts, the feelings, and the talking about it seems to inoculate them from actually performing it. Whereas guys, they have no one to mirror it. They internalize all of that and they simply act on it without ever telling anyone that they were stressed in the first place. And we go, damn, I didn't see that coming. So it's possible that when we say women suffer from more chronic stress during adolescence, it's probably true, but the percentage is probably a lot less than we think it is, simply because men don't have that outlet to talk about it and simply have to respond to it. Now, I don't know what this means. I don't think this means anything for women. You just keep doing what you do. But I do think this means for guys during adolescence, if you feel like you're going down that chronic stress path, you need to find an outlet. You need to find a mirror. And if it can't be a friend, if it can't be a parent, get a counselor, get a psych. Anyone whose entire job is simply to mirror and share that with you. Because by that sharing, that's how you're going to inoculate yourself. And actually, it's going to suck while you're doing it. But that's what we think can stop you from actually acting on it.
Yeah, shattering the stigma that like boys have to be very unfeeling and macho is important. Yeah. How do you think we should help our friends cope with stress and like create a safe space for them to do so?
It's tricky. So here's where the sex issue comes back again. So a lot of women say, hey, I can be a sounding board. I can mirror it back to my boyfriends. But a lot of the time, especially during adolescence, they don't want that. Because it's expected not only that guys are macho, but it's also expected that their girlfriends think they're macho. So if my girlfriend wants to cry with me, no, that's horrible. I don't want to cry with nobody. It's almost better if that outlet person, or almost easier if that outlet person is a total third party, is just a psychologist or a school counselor or someone that the guy doesn't feel the pressure to be a guy around, if that makes sense. I'd like to think that's changing in your generation. It definitely did between my parents' generation and mine. That kind of macho male thing started to waver. And I think between my generation and yours, it's really starting to waver. And I think eventually we're going to get to the point where emotions aren't seen as a weakness. It's the total normal part of cognition. It's the same thing, and I hate to go on a tangent here, but it is a big issue. Is a big source of stress with women during adolescence is their period, is menses. And it's so still vilified in the world in such a way that's so weird. Like if you look at a commercial for a tampon or a maxi pad, they still use blue liquid. Like we're afraid to even say that women bleed. Half the world, literally half of the population go through this thing that we are still taboo, afraid to talk about. It's like, come on, turn the page and start to reduce the stress that we're putting on people for having natural bodily reactions. If you don't have a period, it's going to be very difficult for you to have children someday. If you want children, then accept the process. It's biology. It's fine. And so it's the same thing I think with men and emotions is it's biology. Don't be scared of it. Don't shy away. Don't shove it under the rug. Own it. It's fine. No one's going to judge you if we all stand up and say, guess what? My wife has periods too. Or if we had a commercial where instead of blue liquid, they used red liquid. The world isn't going to fall apart. We know what's happening. Let's just talk about it.
Totally.
I don't know. That's a bit of a tangent, but I think that's another stressor where it's like, there doesn't need to be stress when it's normal, when that's what we do. The sex question during adolescence, man, it's the most normal thing in the world. Not talking about drugs or alcohol. Man, it is the most normal thing in the world when you're a teenager to start playing with that stuff. It's fine. We can't pretend it doesn't happen. Just do it, destigmatize it, and watch when stress starts to go down.
Societal pressures are a big contributor to stress. I think especially nowadays, but also like Gen Z, millennials are working so hard to like destigmatize all of that.
That's why I love your generation. I'm telling you, you guys are inspiring as heck because you're actually taking steps to change that. My generation didn't. My parents didn't. They were more get a job, get rich, that 80s mentality. But your generation is starting to say there's more to life than all of this stuff. And we're hopefully supporting you in that. But I think, your generation is going to make some very good changes.
Yes, everything's changing.
Yay! And it needs to.
Awesome. Okay, I think I'm going to wrap it up now. Thank you so much, Dr. Jared, for sharing your wonderful insight with us. I thoroughly enjoyed it and learned so much.
Thank you guys. I always love doing this. And anytime, if there's another theme you guys want to talk about or something someday, just let me know. I'm always happy to chat.
For sure. I'm such a big fan of all your work, your online course and your talks. And it's just been such an honor having you on this podcast.
Thank you so much. Keep up the good work. And I'm sure you guys I'll be seeing you guys around the lab in the next 5-10 years.
Hopefully. Thank you so much.
Gonna happen. All right. See you guys. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
You too.
You too.
Bye, y'all.